Play for a piece of food? The manager's voice cuts through the clink of silverware like a slap. Mr. Holloway doesn't lower it. He wants the room to hear. Laughter ripples across the white tablecloths of the Silver Crown, bouncing off crystal and chrome. A few phones tilt up, live streams flicker on, captions sprout in real time. Janitor's kid begs at a fine restaurant. At the doorway stands a small girl in an oversized sweater, elbows shiny with wear. Alyssa Carter, 9, daughter of Leonard Carter, the building's black janitor who's been too sick lately to finish his night shifts. Her shoes are split, her knuckles chapped. Her stomach has been empty long enough to growl like it's angry at her. Still, her eyes don't move from the corner, where a black piano sits under a pile of coats, half forgotten, like a secret no one bothered to keep. Not for janitor's kids. A man at table 7 snorts, not bothering to hide it. Someone repeats it for the live, slower, crueler. Another laughs. What's next? She dances for dessert. Alyssa holds a frayed cloth bag to her chest. Inside, a few yellowed pages of music her father used to hum while pushing a broom. Her fingers tremble, but not from fear alone. It's the ache of wanting to touch keys she hasn't touched in months. Mr. Holloway folds his arms, smirks for the cameras. 5 minutes, he says, like he's tossing scraps to a stray. If it's awful, you leave. No food phones rise higher. Comments flood in, laughing faces, rolling eyes, the kind of cruelty that needs an audience. Alyssa swallows, steps forward. The room leans back to enjoy the spectacle. Only she leans in, toward the piano, toward the one place in this bright, cold room that might still remember her name. The Silver Crown sparkled that night. Chandeliers glowed like frozen fire, scattering light across linen-draped tables. Rows of polished silverware gleamed as if no one had ever touched them. Waiters in pressed vests moved like clockwork, pouring wine that cost more than Alyssa's father made in a week. Laughter rolled through the air, polite and sharp, bouncing off marble walls where portraits of old white founders stared down with painted approval. A woman in pearls glanced up and whispered to her husband, "She doesn't belong here." "Look at her shoes." He didn't whisper back. He chuckled loud enough for Alyssa to hear. Another diner raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Disgusting, bringing the streets inside." Alyssa's small frame was swallowed in the brightness. Her sweater hung crooked over patched jeans, the hems stiff with dirt. She clutched a cloth bag to her chest as though it held her heartbeat. Inside, sheet music scrawled in her father's hand, notes smudged from years of use. The only thing that tied her to a world where she once felt safe. She rubbed the corner of one page through the fabric, like touching it might give her courage. Outside the tall window, pressed against the glass, sat Tasha, 10 years old, her cheeks hollowed by the same hunger. She had slipped inside before but been thrown out, so now she crouched low, invisible to everyone except Alyssa. Their eyes met through the pain. Tasha mouthed, "Don't cry." Alyssa's throat tightened. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall here. Not under this chandelier, light meant for others. Her stomach twisted again, a cruel reminder. She gripped the bag tighter, her knuckles bone white against the faded cloth. From across the room, a waiter carrying champagne snickered under his breath. "Hope she doesn't touch anything." His colleague smirked. "Not unless she's polishing the floor like her daddy." Alyssa heard it. The words burned, but she didn't flinch. She straightened, even in her ragged clothes. Around her, the room glittered with wealth and confidence. Around her, every detail screamed she didn't belong. And yet, the piano in the corner sat waiting, half hidden under strangers' coats, the only thing in the Silver Crown that seemed to recognize her. Tasha tapped the window once with her small fist, as if to send strength through the glass. Alyssa nodded, almost imperceptibly, then stepped further inside, her bag held close, the music whispering louder than the laughter. Alyssa stood small against the glow of chandeliers, the bag of sheet music pressed against her chest like armor, her voice trembling but clear. "Please, sir," she said softly, eyes darting toward the covered piano. I can play, if I could have just a little food. For a breath, the restaurant hushed. Then Mr. Holloway barked out a laugh that cracked the silence in two. He doubled over, clutching his stomach as though she had told the funniest joke of the night. "You hear that?" he called to the room. "The janitor's kid wants to perform for supper." Laughter rolled back in, louder this time. A woman in a fur wrap clapped once, mocking applause. A young man at a corner table lifted his phone, zooming in. "This is gold," he muttered. Holloway straightened, wiping the corners of his eyes. His smirk lingered as he leaned down close enough for Alyssa to smell the cologne on his lapel. 5 minutes, he sneered. "That's all you get? 5 minutes of free entertainment. If you're terrible, you walk right out." No food, no sympathy. Snickers spread across the tables. One man raised his glass and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Will she dance for dessert next?" The table erupted in cruel laughter. A waitress passing by whispered to another, not softly enough, "This isn't the ghetto." What's she even doing in here? Alyssa's cheeks burned, but her hands stayed tight on the bag. She wanted to look away, to vanish under the marble floor, but something inside her held steady. She thought of her father's hands, scarred, cracked, still moving across a mop even when sickness bent his back. She thought of his voice. "Music is your weapon, baby girl. Don't let them take that from you." She lifted her chin. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Thank you." Mock applause filled the air, not the sound of support, but of an audience eager to see a child humiliate herself. Phones were already lifted high, red lights blinking. Captions were being typed before she even touched a key. Tasha's face appeared again in the window, pale against the dark outside. She shook her head desperately, mouthing, "You don't have to do this." But Alyssa's feet had already moved, one step, then another, toward the corner where the piano waited. Holloway followed, loud enough for all to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, throwing an arm wide, "tonight's special feature, a little street show, courtesy of our janitor's daughter. Don't blink, this'll be over quick." Cruel laughter swelled again, mingling with the clatter of cutlery and the hiss of a cork pulled too hard from a bottle. Alyssa didn't flinch. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning the noise. She reached the piano, laid her bag down gently on the bench, and slid onto the seat. The coats were gone. The lid lifted. The yellowed keys stared back at her like old friends waiting to be touched again. The room leaned in, expecting a spectacle. Alyssa leaned closer still, ready to turn humiliation into something else. Alyssa's legs dangled off the bench, barely brushing the floor. Her small hands hovered above the keys, trembling. For a moment she froze, the weight of every eye pressing down on her like stone. Laughter still lingered in the air, sharp and waiting. She closed her eyes. Her father's voice rose from memory, warm and gravelly. "Music is your weapon, baby girl. Don't swing your fists. Let your fingers fight for you." She exhaled, her fingertips lowered. The first note slipped out fragile, almost too soft to hear. A Debussy phrase, delicate, searching, like a drop of water falling into silence. A few diners chuckled, waiting for her to stumble. But then she added another note and another, the melody weaving into something fragile, yet undeniably alive. Alyssa's shoulders eased. Her right hand fluttered lightly, a bird testing its wings. Then her left hand entered, deep and steady, grounding the flight. The room shifted. Glasses stopped clinking. A fork froze halfway to someone's mouth. What had begun as background noise grew louder, richer, filling corners of the room that even chandeliers couldn't reach. She drifted into Chopin without pause, the transition seamless, like she had carried him in her pocket all along. Her small body swayed. Each phrase pulled something out of her, a hunger, a loss, a fierce will not to break. Her hands flew faster now, the timid tremble replaced by a flow too natural for a child so young. Phones still hovered, but the captions were changing. The laughing emojis slowed, then stopped. A new line appeared on a live feed. "Wait, is this real?" Another. "Janitor's daughter silenced a whole room." Alyssa's eyes stayed shut. In her mind, she wasn't in the Silver Crown anymore. She was back in her father's tiny apartment, listening to him hum while wiping sweat from his brow, hearing him whisper, "Play it again, Alyssa." Make it sing. The laughter was gone. The restaurant was hushed, held captive by a 9-year-old who had nothing but a frayed sweater, a bag of old music, and magic in her fingers. When the final notes dissolved into silence, Alyssa opened her eyes. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was thick, reverent. Then, from the far corner, a sound. 2 hands clapping, slow and sure. Miss Ruth, her back bent with age, her eyes bright with pride, rose from her chair. Her palms met again and again, steady as a drumbeat, as if summoning everyone else. It spread like fire. One diner, then another, until the whole room was on its feet, clapping not with cruelty, but with awe. Phones now recorded with reverence, not ridicule. Tears welled in the eyes of strangers who had come for pasta and wine, but stayed for a miracle. Mr. Holloway stood frozen, his smirk wiped clean. He glanced at the phones, at the captions flooding in, and for once had no words. Alyssa sat still, her small chest rising and falling. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't asking. She had given them music, and the music had spoken louder than all their laughter combined. And in the glow of chandeliers, a janitor's daughter had turned humiliation into thunderous respect. The applause still echoed when Alyssa slid down from the bench. Her knees shook with the effort of standing, but her fingers still tingled from the keys. She didn't bow. She didn't know how. She just held her bag close and stared at the floor, afraid the magic might vanish if she lifted her head too high. A waiter hurried forward, not the same one who had smirked earlier. His voice was gentler now, as if afraid she might break. "Come with me," he said. He led her to a small table near the wall, away from the spotlight of chandeliers, but still surrounded by stares that felt different. Moments later, a steaming bowl of soup was placed before her, thick, golden broth with vegetables floating like treasure. Beside it, a basket of bread, soft and warm, the smell filling her nose until it made her dizzy. Alyssa's hands shook as she picked up the spoon. The first sip burned her tongue, but she didn't care. Salt and warmth spread through her chest, and before she knew it, tears were sliding down her cheeks. She dipped the spoon again, faster this time, as if the food might disappear. Crumbs of bread clung to her fingers, her lips moving with quiet sobs between bites. Around her, the same diners who had laughed minutes ago now watched in silence. Some looked away, ashamed. Others simply stared, unsettled by the sight of a starving child tasting soup like it was heaven itself. Phones lowered, screens. "Went dark. From the corner, miss." Ruth nodded once, satisfied. She had seen this before, how quickly people could shift when truth was undeniable. Mr. Holloway approached at last. The swagger was gone from his stride. His face was pale, his hands restless at his sides. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of himself. You can finish," he muttered, voice quieter than anyone had ever heard from him. "On the house." Alyssa didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy wiping her eyes with her sleeve, too busy trying to eat slowly like her father had taught her. "Even if you're hungry, baby girl, show them you've got dignity." And for the first time in months, she wasn't being stared at like trash on the sidewalk. For the first time, every gaze in that glittering room seemed to recognize her, not as a nuisance, not as a joke, but as a person. The chandelier light caught the tears on her cheeks. She lowered her head, clutching her bag beside her chair, and whispered inside her heart, "Daddy, they see me." The soup warmed her body. The bread filled her stomach. But more than that, the moment fed something deeper, something she thought she had lost forever, the feeling of being human again. The soup bowl was nearly empty when a shadow fell across the table. Alyssa looked up, expecting another curious diner. Instead, she saw a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, her dark eyes thoughtful behind slim glasses. She carried herself with a quiet authority, the kind that made people step aside without being asked. "May I sit?" the woman asked. Her voice was low, warm, but it carried weight. Alyssa hesitated, then nodded. The woman settled across from her, folding her hands on the table. "My name is Dr. Camille Robinson. I've taught music for 40 years. She paused, studying Alyssa's trembling fingers resting on the cloth bag. "And I've never heard anyone your age play like that." Alyssa swallowed, unsure what to say. I only wanted something to eat." Dr. Robinson's expression softened. "Child, you don't belong on the street. You belong on a stage." The words hit Alyssa harder than the soup's warmth. She blinked quickly, afraid to believe them. "But I don't have a piano anymore. My dad, he's sick. We don't—" "I know, Doctor," Robinson interrupted gently. "I know what it is to lose things, but talent like yours," she leaned forward, her voice sharper now, "cannot be left to die in doorways and alleys." Alyssa hugged her bag tighter. "Nobody wants me to play. They just laugh." "They laughed tonight too, Doctor," Robinson said, tilting her head toward the room. Diners still whispered about the performance, their faces softer, humbled. "But then you silenced them. Do you know how rare that is? To make strangers forget themselves? That's not practice. That's a gift." Alyssa looked down. "My father says the same. He says music is my weapon." Dr. Robinson smiled faintly. "Your father is right, and I have a grand piano in my home. It's been waiting too long for hands that understand it." Alyssa's breath caught. A grand piano. The words sounded unreal, like a dream she wasn't supposed to touch. "You don't know me," she whispered, half afraid, half hoping. "I know enough, Doctor," Robinson replied firmly. "I know genius when I hear it, and I know leaving you out there another night is a crime." Silence stretched between them. Alyssa's stomach tightened, not from hunger but from fear of hope itself. "What if—" Her voice cracked. "What if I mess up?" Dr. Robinson leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "Then you try again. Every great musician fails. What matters is you don't stop playing." Alyssa glanced toward the window. Tasha pressed her palms against the glass, eyes wide, nodding as if urging her to say yes. Dr. Robinson slid a card across the table. "Come tomorrow morning. The address is there. If you want breakfast first, knock. If you want to play, sit at the piano. Either way, my door will open." Alyssa stared at the card as though it were heavier than gold. She whispered, "Thank you." Dr. Robinson's voice softened again, almost like a promise. "No, child. Thank you for reminding us what music is supposed to feel like." The chandeliers still glowed above, but for the first time, Alyssa felt light reach her too. Not pity, not mockery, something different, something like a beginning. The corridors of the Silver Crown were quiet after midnight, emptied of laughter and wine. Only the hiss of fluorescent lights and the squeak of a mop echoed against the marble. Leonard Carter pushed the handle slowly, each movement heavy, like his body was made of iron too worn to bend. His back curved from years of labor, his chest strained with every breath. The doctor had called it lungs collapsing under time. But Leonard had no time to collapse. Rent needed paying, his daughter needed food. So he kept cleaning, one corner at a time, the night swallowing his coughs. The janitor's cart rattled when he leaned too hard. He stopped, pressing a fist to his mouth, his knuckles scarred from decades of scrubbing. The rag in his other hand was stiff with bleach. These were the same hands that had once rocked Alyssa to sleep. The same hands that had lifted her up so she could reach piano keys too high for her small arms. "Daddy." The whisper pulled him back. He turned, surprised to see Alyssa standing at the end of the hallway, her cloth bag slung over her shoulder. Her cheeks were still red from the stairs inside the restaurant, but her eyes shone brighter than he remembered. Leonard set the mop aside. "What are you doing here, baby girl?" "It's late." "I played, Daddy," she said quickly, words tumbling out. "They laughed first, but then they stopped." They listened. They clapped. Her small hands flew up in the air, mimicking the clapping, her voice cracking between pride and disbelief. Leonard's face softened. He crouched slowly, knees protesting, until his calloused hands could cup her face. "I knew you would," he whispered. "I always knew." Alyssa pressed her hands against his. The roughness of his skin scratched her palms, but she didn't pull away. She looked down at his fingers, cracked and raw from chemicals, then lifted her own, remembering how they danced across piano keys. The contrast made her throat tighten. "Daddy, Doctor." "Robinson said I don't belong on the street. She said I belong on a stage." Leonard chuckled, though the sound ended in a cough. "That woman is right." He wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, then rested his palm gently over her tiny hand. "But listen to me. When you play, you don't play just for food. You play for both of us, for every hand that's too tired to lift, for every back bent too long. Do you hear me?" Alyssa nodded quickly, tears slipping free. I hear you, Daddy." "Good." His voice deepened, slow but steady. "Music is your weapon, baby girl. My hands clean floors. Your hands make people listen. That's how we fight." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss into her knuckles, then guided it up into the air, as if placing it on invisible piano keys. "Play for both of us." For a moment, Alyssa closed her eyes and imagined it, her small fingers stretching across shining ivory, her father's calloused hand resting over hers, the two of them sharing one instrument, one song. The mop clattered when Leonard leaned back against the wall, breath shallow. Alyssa caught his arm, steadying him. "Daddy, you should rest." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "Not yet. Floors don't clean themselves, but promise me, don't let anyone make you small." "You're bigger than their laughter." Alyssa's arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his work shirt that smelled of soap and sweat. "I promise." The hallway buzzed with the hum of old lights, but in Alyssa's ears, it was drowned out by a melody only she could hear, her father's hands and hers, playing together, turning pain into music. And as Leonard lifted the mop again, slow and stubborn, Alyssa knew she would carry those hands with her to every piano she touched. The National Conservatory rose like a stone ship at the edge of the city, columns, staircases, glass that caught the morning sun and threw it back colder. Inside, hallways hummed with scales and arpeggios, the air smelling faintly of polish and ambition. Dr. Camille Robinson walked as if she owned the floors, composed, assured, the kind of presence that made receptionists stand taller. Alyssa kept pace a step behind, clutching her cloth bag, her eyes wide at the framed photographs of prodigies lining the walls. A door opened onto a small conference room where 3 faculty members waited. A metronome ticked quietly on a shelf, like a heartbeat that refused to calm. At the head of the table stood Marcus Alden, 55, grey hair, sharply parted, suit pressed to a crease that could cut glass. He didn't offer his hand. "Miss Robinson," he said, not quite a greeting. "Dr. Robinson," Camille corrected gently, then placed a palm on Alyssa's shoulder. "This is Alyssa Carter." Marcus looked her over the way a jeweler examines a stone he already suspects is fake. "9?" "9," Camille replied. "You'll want to hear her." A younger faculty member leaned forward, curious. "Is she the child from the Silver Crown video?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "We're not an internet channel," he said. His gaze settled on Alyssa, cool and measuring. "We cultivate standards." Camille's voice stayed calm. "Standards are precisely why I'm here." She silenced a hostile room with Debussy and Chopin. No coaching, no rehearsal. Just raw understanding. Marcus let the silence stretch, the metronome ticking like a taunt. Finally he said, "We can't risk reputation on a janitor's kid." The words hit the table and stayed there. One faculty member winced, another stared at his hands. Camille didn't blink. "You are free to risk it on talent." Alyssa swallowed, small and still, but her chin didn't drop. Marcus turned a page in a folder he didn't need. "Several colleagues have asked to hear you," he said to Alyssa without softening. "I disagree. This school is not a charity, and pity is not pedagogy." Camille's tone cooled a degree. "Then propose something you'll respect." He snapped the folder shut. 5 days. The metronome seemed louder. "Each morning at noon, you'll receive a new piece. Bach, Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. We'll see. You'll have exactly 24 hours. Next day, you perform from memory in the recital hall, in front of 5 judges." Alyssa's fingers curled into her bag. Camille's hand found her shoulder again. Marcus continued, precise. "No coaching during official practice. You may use room 15 until 10 p.m. If you fail a day, the trial ends. No media, no grandstanding. This is a conservatory, not a circus." The younger faculty member cleared his throat. "That's ambitious for a child." "Genius is not fragile," Marcus said. "Or so I'm told." Camille's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And if she succeeds?" Marcus's mouth thinned. "If she succeeds all 5 days, I will recommend full scholarship admission to the board. My signature, my name." He let that hang like a dare. Camille looked to Alyssa. "You don't owe him anything," she said softly. "But if you want this door, that's the key he's holding." Alyssa thought of her father's hands, raw from bleach. She thought of the piano breathing under her fingers, of a room that had forgotten how to laugh at her. She lifted her chin. "I'll try." Marcus nodded once, as if acknowledging a move in a game he expected to win. "Room 15 is down the hall. Your first assignment arrives at noon tomorrow. Bring a pencil. Leave the drama." As they turned to go, he added, without looking up, "And Miss Carter, around here, the only thing that speaks is the music. Make it say something I haven't already heard." In the corridor, the metronome's tick faded behind them. Camille crouched to Alyssa's height. "Listen to me," she murmured. "Eat, sleep, don't chase perfection. Chase truth. That's what broke the restaurant." Alyssa nodded, gripping the strap of her bag. Outside the window, the city flashed by. Buses, storefronts, a world that didn't know a gauntlet had been thrown. Back inside, Marcus reopened the empty folder and stared at the blank page, the faintest crease forming between his brows, as if something about the silence after the girl spoke had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Room 15 smelled of varnish and dust, a piano standing guard in the middle like an old soldier. Alyssa placed the score on the stand, Bach Partita in C minor. Notes filled the page like tiny armies. She traced the lines with her finger, her stomach knotting. The door creaked. Tasha slipped inside, clutching a brown paper bag. She grinned sheepishly. "Got this from the back of the bakery." She pulled out a dry loaf, edges hard as stone. Alyssa's eyes widened. "For me?" "Split it," Tasha said quickly, tearing the bread in half. They chewed in silence, crumbs scattering across the keys. Hunger eased, if only for a moment. When Alyssa placed her fingers on the piano again, the music was less terrifying. She practiced measure by measure, whispering her father's words. "Music is your weapon." Her fingers fumbled, then found strength. Hours blurred. At 10 o'clock, the custodian rattled his keys. Time was up. The next morning, the recital hall swallowed her whole. 5 judges sat stiff at the table, pens ready. Marcus Alden at the center, face carved from ice. Alyssa adjusted the bench, feet barely reaching the pedals. She inhaled. And then, sound. The opening line of Bach spilled out, clean and precise, each voice balanced, counterpoint unfolding like gears of a clock. Her small body swayed, her left hand anchoring while the right hand sang above it. The fugue unfurled with discipline that belied her age. The judges leaned forward. One scribbled furiously, another's lips parted, surprised. The room stilled, as though Bach himself had entered to supervise. When the last cadence landed, silence clung to the air. For one long moment, Alyssa believed she had done it. Then Marcus spoke. Correct. His voice was flat. Every note accounted for. But he tapped his pen against the table. Just mechanical. The word cut sharper than laughter. Mechanical. As if her hours of hunger and prayer were no more than gears turning. Alyssa's chest tightened. Sir, He raised a hand. Next piece tomorrow at noon. Be on time. The other judges shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged him. The verdict was sealed. Camille's voice broke through the silence as she guided Alyssa from the stage. Don't listen to the cold in his words. You played truth, child. That's why it stung him. In the hallway, Alyssa clutched her bag, head down. Tasha was waiting by the door, breadcrumbs still on her sleeve. You sounded like magic, she whispered fiercely. Alyssa's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. Her eyes burned, but she nodded. Day 1 survived. 4 more to go. Behind them, Marcus closed his folder with a snap. His lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite contempt, as though the game had only just begun. By the second morning, the conservatory halls hummed louder, not with music, but with whispers. Alyssa felt them before she heard the words. Students loitered by lockers, heads bent close, voices dipped just enough to sting. She stole the sheet music. Of course, no way a janitor's kid learns Bach overnight. Probably slipped in and copied it. The lies curled like smoke, impossible to grab, choking all the same. When Alyssa entered the practice room, she found a folded paper on the piano lid, scrawled in block letters, thief. Her throat burned. Dr. Camille stormed in moments later, her face tight. Ignore it, Alyssa. Gossip feeds on fear. But it's not true, Alyssa whispered. I know, Camille cut in firmly. And the truth will outlast their poison. Focus. Today's assignment is Chopin. Alyssa smoothed the score with trembling hands. Chopin, lyrical, tender, unforgiving in its honesty, perfect for what she carried in her chest. But outside the practice room, Marcus Alden passed by, pausing at the doorway. A group of students tittered about the rumor within his earshot. He didn't scold them. He didn't deny it. He only smiled thinly, the kind of smile that confirmed without words. That smile nearly broke her. By noon, Alyssa sat again in the recital hall, the same judges, the same cold rows of chairs. She adjusted the bench, eyes down. Marcus cleared his throat. Miss Carter, you may begin. Her fingers hovered. She heard the whispers echoing. Thief, liar, doesn't belong. For a heartbeat, she thought of running. Then her mind reached for something stronger. Her father's rasping voice in the corridor. Play for both of us, baby girl. Her hands lowered. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E minor floated into the room, fragile, aching. Alyssa let the melody breathe, each phrase a confession. Her small body swayed, head bowed, as if whispering secrets only the piano could keep. The judges stilled. One woman closed her eyes, lips trembling with unspoken memory. Another leaned forward, elbows on the table. Even the hall seemed to hush, walls bending closer to listen. Alyssa played as though she were speaking directly to her father, every swell of the left hand carrying his weary breath, every whisper of the right hand his hope passed into her. When the nocturne dipped into shadow, she poured in her hunger, her shame, her fear. When it lifted, she laced it with the fragile thread of survival. Her final cadence dissolved like a sigh. Silence followed, heavy and reverent. For one brief second, Alyssa dared to hope. Then Marcus's voice sliced through. Too sentimental. The words landed like a stone. He tapped his pen against the table once, sharp. Chopin requires balance, control. This was indulgence. One of the other judges frowned. She played with unusual depth for her age. Marcus raised a hand. Depth or drama? I heard drama. His eyes flicked toward Alyssa, cool, unyielding. This is a conservatory, not a stage for pity. Alyssa's lips parted, but no words came. Her stomach clenched, the bread from Tasha now sitting like a rock inside her. Camille stood abruptly, her chair scraping. She played truth. And you're afraid of it. But Marcus only stacked his papers, unmoved. Tomorrow, list, noon, dismissed. Alyssa gathered her bag with trembling hands. As she left the stage, the whispers were already waiting outside. But this time, though her heart ached, she didn't drop her gaze. She whispered to herself, too quiet for anyone but her own ears. I'll play again. For him. For me. For both of us. Behind her, Marcus sat motionless, but his pen pressed so hard into the page it tore the paper. Day 3. The name on the sheet music glared back at her. Liszt, Etude in D-flat major. Pages dense with black notes, cascades of fire meant for hands twice her size. Alyssa's stomach twisted, but she pressed her palm flat against the paper, whispering, for both of us, Daddy. By noon, the recital hall was fuller than before. Word had spread. The janitor's daughter was still standing. Students crowded the back rows, phones hidden in pockets, recording against the rules. Judges sat poised, Marcus Alden's face as unreadable as ever. Alyssa climbed onto the bench, adjusted the seat, placed her hands, then froze. The low E key, stuck halfway down, chipped at the edge. 2 others were dead, refusing to sound. Her breath caught. She tested again, heart sinking. This wasn't where. Someone had done this. She looked up. Marcus's gaze was steady, cold, not surprise, knowledge. He wouldn't stop it. For a moment, panic threatened. How do I play Liszt on a broken piano? Her throat tightened. She thought of running. Then her father's voice. Music is your weapon. Make it fight, no matter what. Her small hands dropped. The first run erupted, clumsy at first, skipping over dead keys. A few titters rose from the back rows, but Alyssa's eyes sharpened. Instead of freezing, she shifted octaves, rolling chords higher, filling gaps with notes that still sang. Her fingers darted, like birds avoiding traps, inventing a new path every measure. Gasps rippled. What should have been chaos turned into something raw, electrifying. Alyssa leaned into it, sweat on her forehead, her body swaying with urgency. The hall held its breath as the broken piano became alive again under her touch. Not perfect Liszt, but something uniquely hers. Marcus scribbled notes, jaw clenched. He hadn't expected her to adapt. And then, from the back of the hall, a chair scraped loudly. An old man in a beret, skin the color of mahogany polished by decades of stage lights, rose to his feet. His cane tapped once against the floor. Jerome Ellis, the jazz legend whose name still echoed in Harlem clubs, pointed at Alyssa. I know genius when I see it, he said, voice gravel and thunder. This girl got it. The hall erupted. Students craned necks, whispering furiously. A few clapped, though the judges hadn't ended the performance. Phones shot higher now, streams going live. Alyssa's heart pounded, but she didn't falter. She drove the final run home, hands flying, twisting around the broken keys, as though Liszt himself had written them that way. The last chord rang sharp but triumphant. Silence. Then, applause. Not mocking, but real, bursting. Marcus's pen hovered above his page, his face pale with control. Unorthodox, he muttered. Borderline undisciplined. Jerome Ellis's cane tapped again. Borderline? That was survival. That was creation. That's music. Even some faculty nodded. Camille's smile gleamed like steel. Alyssa sat, breathless, clutching the edge of the bench. She hadn't just survived sabotage, she had turned it into song. And for the first time, The world outside the conservatory's walls began to notice, because by evening, the headline trended on feeds: Janitor's daughter turns broken piano into brilliance, and the game Marcus Alden thought he controlled was slipping from his hands. By noon, the envelope arrived, heavy as a verdict: Rachmaninoff. The title alone felt like a mountain: dark chords, iron weight, octaves that asked more from hands than a 9-year-old should give. Alyssa set the score on the stand in room 15 and flexed her fingers, trying to shake the tremble out. She had barely traced the first measures when the door flew open. Dr. Camille Robinson stood there, breath short, eyes too calm to be anything but bad news. "Alyssa," she said softly, "your father collapsed at work." They took him to Mercy General. The words didn't land all at once. They dropped in pieces. Father, collapsed, Mercy General, and then the floor seemed to tilt. Alyssa gripped the piano's edge. "Is he?" Her voice broke. "Is he going to—" "They're running tests," Camille said, crossing the room to steady her. "He's conscious. He kept asking for you. Alyssa's lungs forgot how to work." The room blurred, the metronome, the lamp, the staff lines. "I should. Go, I have to go." "You can," Camille said. "And if you do, we end this trial today. We walk away. You choose." Alyssa stared at the Rachmaninoff. The notes looked like caves she had to cross. Her hands were already shaking as if the music were a storm. The phone on Camille's hip buzzed. She glanced, then handed it over. "It's the hospital." A nurse's voice filled the line, then a rasping whisper bled through. "Baby girl?" "Daddy?" Alyssa pressed the phone to her ear with both hands. "You listen to me," Leonard said, breath gravelly, stubborn. "Don't let them stop you." "Don't let them—" A cough tore the sentence. "Silence us." Tears spilled before Alyssa could stop them. "But I'm scared." "So am I," Leonard said. "I'll be here when you're done." "Play for both of us." The line clicked. The dial tone hummed like a low note. Camille cupped Alyssa's cheek. "What do you choose?" Alyssa swallowed hard, wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, and looked at the score again. "I'll play." Practice was a blur of weight and reach. Rachmaninoff demanded hands that could span the distance between hurt and hope. Alyssa didn't have that reach, so she made bridges, rolling octaves, slipping inner voices where her fingers couldn't stretch, finding the thunder without losing the song underneath. Every few minutes, fear punched through her focus, and she had to start again. Camille stood silent, a pillar in the corner, refusing to feed panic with words. At 11:55, the custodian rattled his keys. Time was up. The recital hall felt colder than the day before. The judges shuffled their papers. Marcus Alden sat statue still, the line of his mouth carved from stone. Word of Leonard's collapse had traveled faster than propriety. Students in the back row traded whispers, eyes flicking to Alyssa's small frame, the way her hands trembled and then stilled. Camille squeezed her shoulder at the wing. "Remember, truth, not perfection." Alyssa walked to the bench as if stepping onto thin ice. She adjusted the seat, let her fingers hover, breathed, thought of bleach-stung knuckles pushing a mop, of a hospital bed with rails too high. Don't let them silence us. She dropped her hands. The first chords struck heavy, ringing like church bells, shaking the air. Her left anchored deep, her right climbed high, the whole leaning forward as if bracing. The piece demanded strength her small frame shouldn't have, yet she bent it to her will, rolling octaves where her hands couldn't stretch, turning tremors into fire. Halfway through, her fingers faltered. A hush rippled. Alyssa clenched her jaw, pushed harder. The tremor became part of the music. Raw, human. Gasps broke out when she drove into the cadenza, sound pouring like a storm from a child's hands. The last chord landed, hanging in the silence like a question no one dared answer. The final chords did not crash. They landed like a strong body folding into a chair after a long day. The resonance pooled at her feet. Silence. Long enough for a throat to close around it. A sniff. A single clap from the back, then another. The applause rose gently, not thunder this time, but a standing wave. People standing slowly, moved not by spectacle, but by witness. Marcus's jaw worked. He tapped his pen once, then spoke. "Better control," he said. The words clipped. Still, overly dramatic. A judge beside him turned, incredulous. "She's 9. Rachmaninoff doesn't care," Marcus replied. Camille's look could have cut marble. She didn't waste it on him. She met Alyssa at the wing and wrapped her in an embrace that smelled like lavender and sheet music. "You did it," she whispered. "You made them feel." By evening, the whispers had outrun the walls again. Posts appeared with shaky captions. She played after her father collapsed. Rachmaninoff with trembling hands. The story wasn't just about a trial anymore. It was about a child refusing to let a system, or fear, claim her silence. And somewhere under hospital fluorescence, a janitor smiled through pain, listening for a music he couldn't hear, trusting it had spoken for him. Day 5 dawned grey, as though the city itself held its breath. Alyssa barely touched her breakfast. Her fingers ached, her stomach felt hollow, but her eyes, dark and steady, never left the small cloth bag where her father's old sheet music slept. By noon, the recital hall was packed. Students squeezed against the back wall. Faculty filled the aisles. Even some from the city had slipped in, hungry for the story that was spilling beyond the conservatory's gates. At the table of judges, Marcus Alden adjusted his spectacles and let the silence stretch before he spoke. 4 days, he said, voice clipped. Today, no assignment, no excuses. Now show us who you really are. The challenge wasn't neutral, it was a taunt. Alyssa felt it slice, sharp as glass. Her heart kicked. She looked at Camille. The older woman leaned close, whispering, "You've carried this music in your soul all along. Let them hear your voice, not theirs." Alyssa nodded, stepped forward, and faced the hall. Her voice trembled but carried. "I'll play something I wrote. It's called Letter to My Father." A stir ran through the audience. Murmurs, raised brows. Even some judges shifted in their seats. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Original?" He tapped his pen. "Risky." "Necessary," Alyssa answered, barely above a whisper. She sat at the grand piano, her feet dangling above the floor, closed her eyes, saw bleach-stung hands gripping a mop, heard her father's rasp, "Don't let them silence us." Then she began. The first notes were simple, fragile like a child asking questions in the dark. The melody climbed carefully, hesitant, then deepened into chords that shook with grief. Every measure carried memory. The soup she ate after days of hunger, the laughter that turned to silence at Silver Crown, the broken piano keys she refused to surrender to. Midway, the piece grew fierce. Her small hands attacked the keys, rage pulsing through the dissonance. The hall flinched at the sudden storm. This was no child's recital. This was a cry. Then, just as quickly, the fury softened. The music thinned into a lullaby, aching, tender. Alyssa's head bowed low, her shoulders shaking. She played not for applause, not for approval, but for the man lying in a hospital bed, fighting with lungs too tired to hold his voice. Gasps broke the silence. One judge raised a hand to cover his mouth. In the back, someone sobbed quietly. When the final note faded, Alyssa didn't move. Her hands hovered, then dropped to her lap, trembling. Silence, heavy, sacred. Then, from somewhere in the audience, slow clapping began. It spread, growing louder, until the entire hall thundered. Not mockery, not polite formality, but the sound of people who had been pierced by truth. Marcus sat stiff, pen unmoving. His eyes betrayed something, a flicker of recognition, maybe even fear. He cleared his throat. "Unorthodox," he muttered, as if grasping for ground, but undeniably hers. Camille rose from her seat, her voice steady but fierce. And that's the point, Marcus. She doesn't just repeat music, she creates it. Alyssa looked out over the sea of faces, white and black, young and old, all lifted toward her with something she hadn't felt in months. Respect. For the first time since her father collapsed, Alyssa smiled. Small, tired, but certain. She had shown them who she really was, and no one could take it back. The last note still floated when the hall froze. You could hear a breath catch, a shoe scrape, the tick of a watch. Alyssa kept her hands in her lap, head bowed, as if the silence itself were part of the piece. Then, clap, one pair of hands, steady, deliberate. Everyone turned. Miss Ruth, the elder black woman who had clapped first at Silver Crown, was on her feet. Her palms cracked the air. Her voice, frail but fierce, rang out. "Play, baby girl!" Play the sound carried like a spark. Another clap, then another. In seconds, the hall roared, applause spilling over, people standing row by row, a wave that refused to stop. Students stamped their feet. Faculty rose, tears shining. But at the judges' table, Marcus Alden stayed seated, arms folded, pen still in hand. His silence cut against the thunder, an island of cold refusal. Jerome Ellis leaned on his cane, eyes blazing. He turned, his voice booming through the ovation. "If you don't see it," he barked, "you blind." The applause grew louder, echoing off marble and glass. All eyes swung to Marcus. His jaw twitched. For a moment it looked like he'd resist, dig in, freeze her out. But the tide had turned. The room no longer belonged to him. Marcus pushed back his chair, stood. The first clap was stiff, reluctant, then another, then louder, until even he was swallowed in the ovation he could not control. When the hall finally softened, he cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said, the words brittle, "by the authority of this conservatory and my own recommendation, you are awarded a full scholarship." The audience erupted again, this time with shouts, cheers that rattled the ceiling. Alyssa's eyes lifted at last. For a second she looked only at Miss Ruth, whose hands were still raised high, then at Jerome, who nodded once, slow and proud. Finally, she let herself see Marcus, the man forced to applaud what he tried to bury. Tears stung her vision, but her smile broke wide. Not just relief, not just victory, but justice, loud, undeniable, and public. For the first time, the janitor's daughter stood in a room that could no longer pretend she didn't belong. By the next morning, the clip had traveled farther than the conservatory's walls. A shaky phone video, Alyssa on stage, hands small against the grand piano, finishing letter to my father, blazed across feeds. The caption read, "They mocked her." Now she owns the stage. 12 seconds long, it cut from Marcus's stone face to the standing ovation. Within hours, it had crossed neighborhoods, cities, continents. On a bus in Detroit, a woman held up her phone, eyes wet. "Lord, look at that baby. 9 years old." In Atlanta, a barber replayed the clip for every customer. "That's us right there. That's our child." In Oakland, a teacher paused class, holding the screen high. "Listen to her hands. She's saying what history tried to bury." Comments flooded every platform. Janitor's daughter versus the system. And she won. She played for all of us. This is why we tell our kids, don't let them write your story. The video hit 1 million views in a day. By the third, 10 million. News anchors replayed it with solemn voices. Talk shows debated whether genius could survive without privilege. But in living rooms, barbershops, church basements, the debate was over. She already belonged to the people. Even celebrities joined. A jazz singer tweeted, "Reminds me of my grandma's hands on the keys." Pure Soul, a basketball star, posted the clip with the caption, "From the mop bucket to the stage, respect." At Mercy General, Leonard lay propped in bed, the glow of a borrowed phone lighting his tired face. He watched the clip again and again, tears slipping into his beard. A nurse passing by whispered, "That your little girl." Leonard's voice cracked, but pride carried it. "That's my daughter." "That's our song in church the following Sunday, miss." Ruth stood in the back row, phone in hand, showing anyone who'd listen. "I told y'all she had it. I told y'all." And across timelines, across tongues, one phrase repeated like a chorus. "She's ours, not just a prodigy, not just a scholarship winner." Alyssa Carter, the janitor's daughter, had become a mirror, a banner, a promise, and the world was watching. 6 months later, the conservatory glowed like a lighthouse, banners high, spotlights combing the night, a red carpet rolled across stone steps, polished for donors and cameras. Inside, the grand hall held 1,000 seats and 1,000 expectations. Names murmured, programs rustled, jewelry flashed like tiny comets. Backstage, Alyssa Carter stood in a simple black dress, hands folded over her cloth bag, the same one that once held a child's hunger and a few yellowed pages. She had grown, but only a little. The piano still dwarfed her. What had changed was the way the hall breathed when her name appeared on the program, featured soloist, Letter to My Father. Dr. Camille Robinson adjusted the girl's collar, eyes steady. "You remember," she said, voice low, "truth over perfection." Alyssa nodded. "Truth," she echoed, as if tasting the word. From the wings, Marcus Alden conferred with stage staff, chin high, smile practiced. To the press, he looked proud. In the corner of his mouth, a muscle jumped like a warning. The house lights dimmed. A whisper passed through the crowd. Leonard Carter entering carefully on a cane, escorted by a nurse. His face was thin, skin sallow under winter lights, but his eyes burned clear. People parted to let him through, a hush falling the way it does when a story reaches the one person it belongs to. He reached the front row. Miss Ruth was there already, dressed in her Sunday best, clutching her program like a hymn book. "Sit, baby," she said, patting the chair beside her. "Your girl's about to make the air, remember." Leonard's hands trembled as he lowered himself. On the giant screen above the stage, cameras found him. A ripple moved through the hall as strangers realized the man with the cane was the father in the title. Backstage, Jerome Ellis leaned on his cane beside Camille, grinning. "Hall's ready," he murmured. "They just don't know for what yet." A stagehand lifted a finger. 2 minutes. Alyssa closed her eyes and heard a mop bucket roll down a quiet corridor, the soft slap of bleach water, her father's breath like a metronome that had learned stubbornness. She touched the bench with her fingertips, the way some people touch a pulpit. "Ready?" Camille asked. Alyssa exhaled. "For both of us." The curtain parted clean as a page turn. The hall rose around her like a tide. She walked into the light with the small, measured steps of a child who has learned how to carry weight without spilling it. The piano waited, lid open, strings catching the glow. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed, "the National Conservatory Gala welcomes featured soloist, Alyssa Carter." Applause swelled, polite at first, then fuller when the cameras found her face. So young, so grave. Alyssa bowed, the dress whispering around her knees, then sat. Her heels hovered above the pedals as always. She placed the cloth bag under the bench and rested her hands in her lap. In the front row, Leonard leaned forward, knuckles white on his cane. "Play, baby girl," he breathed. Alyssa met his eyes, just for a heartbeat, then looked down at the keys. The hall quieted to a single living thing. Phones lowered. Even the donors forgot their names. She placed her fingers where they belonged. Not on Debussy, not on Chopin. On the first phrase of the song she had written when the world felt too large and her hands too small. "Letter to My Father." Alyssa inhaled, gathering months of practice, nights of doubt, the weight of a system that had tried to size her, file her, sentence her. In that breath lived soup steam, broken keys, hospital white, a janitor's laugh that wouldn't die. Then she let the breath go, and the hall leaned in to listen. The last phrase of "letter to my father" hung in the rafters, like a prayer answered late, but answered still. Alyssa's hands lifted from the keys and returned to her lap. For a breath, the grand hall forgot how to breathe. Then Miss Ruth rose, again the first, and clapped once, twice, steady as a church drum. The ovation surged up behind her, row after row, 1,000 people on their feet. Cameras swung, flashes popped, but the loudest thing in the room was the sound of strangers who had been changed. Alyssa stood and bowed, small in a sea of light. She glanced to the front row. Leonard's fingers crushed the head of his cane, pride and tears fighting in his eyes. He mouthed, "For both of us." She nodded. The MC crossed the stage, smiled, then stepped aside as Marcus Alden approached the microphone. His smile was practiced, his voice was smooth. "In 30 years," he said, letting the crowd lean in, "I've rarely seen brilliance like this." Applause swelled again, but this time a current ran through it, murmurs sharpening, a chant forming low in the back. "Say her name," someone called. It rolled forward, louder. "Say her name!" Marcus blinked, glanced toward the wings. Camille, arms folded. Jerome Ellis, chin lifted. Miss Ruth cupped her hands around her mouth. "Go on, Professor. Say her name." The chant filled the hall now, rhythmic, undeniable. Marcus's jaw set, then loosened. He raised a hand for quiet. The sound dimmed, but did not die. He cleared his throat. Him. Tonight's featured soloist." "No." Jerome cut in from the aisle, voice rich as a horn line. "Not a title." A name, silence, snapped tight. Marcus looked at Alyssa, so small beside the concert grand, and then at the giant screen, where the camera had found Leonard's lined face. The hall waited, a held note demanding resolution. Marcus exhaled. "Alyssa Carter, daughter of Janitor Leonard Carter, has earned this." The room detonated. Cheers, whistles, hands slamming programs against palms. Leonard bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Miss Ruth shouted, "Amen!" like she'd been saving it all year. Camille's eyes shone. Jerome's cane tapped the floor in time with the roar. Marcus pressed on, voice nearly swallowed by the ovation. "By order of the board, and on my recommendation, the National Conservatory formally recognizes her achievement and affirms her full scholarship." He turned to Alyssa, finally meeting her eyes. "You did not borrow anyone's brilliance. You brought your own." Alyssa stepped to the mic, the top of it at her chin. She swallowed, then said simply, "Thank you." She looked at her father. "For the floors you cleaned so I could stand here." The crowd surged again. From every corner came the chorus that had carried her story beyond these walls. "That's our child. She played for all of us." Alyssa bowed once more, then left the mic and walked to the edge of the stage. In the front row, Leonard rose with effort. They reached for each other's hands, his calloused, hers small, and the hall saw what the scholarship really meant. Not charity, but a bill finally paid. The chant returned one last time, not as a demand, but as a celebration. "Say her name." And now the whole hall did, joyfully, thunderously. Alyssa Carter. The flyer was simple. Hidden Harmonies, free music for our kids, Saturdays, community hall, bring nothing but your hands. On the first morning, a dozen children filed into the rec room of New Hope Shelter. Braids, beads, hand-me-down sneakers, eyes bright and wary. Folding chairs scraped into a circle. Loner keyboards lined the wall like a small army. Alyssa, still small herself, in a black hoodie, stood in the center with Doctor. Camille on her left and Jerome Ellis on her right, cane tapping a slow 4/4. "Circle up," Alyssa smiled. Today we make sound together. A boy with a chipped tooth pointed. You're the girl from the video. She's the girl from our city, Ms. Ruth called from the doorway, arms crossed, proud as a choir director. Now hush and learn. Alyssa knelt to the smallest child, a 6-year-old clutching a toy car. You got a favorite sound? The child tapped a key, plinky, thin. Alyssa grinned. Good. We build on that. Jerome lifted his chin. Rule 1, he drawled, voice like warm brass. Ain't wrong notes in this room, just notes that haven't found their family yet. They began with rhythm, hands on knees, feet on tile, claps rising like a heartbeat. Ta-ta-ta! Alyssa chanted, and the kids echoed, shaky then sure. She moved them to keyboards, 2 fingers at first, then 3, the smallest intervals stitched into small victories. Again, Camille said gently, but breathe between phrases. Let silence be part of the song. A girl in a yellow hoodie hesitated at her keyboard. I can't. You can, Alyssa answered. Take my left hand. Their fingers aligned, calloused adult, tiny child, and the chord bloomed. The girl laughed out loud, startled by her own sound. Within weeks the circle doubled. Parents stood along the walls, swaying. Miss Ruth organized snack tables. Church ladies hummed harmony lines under their breath. Leonard arrived slow with his cane, lowering himself carefully, eyes shining as kids crowded him to show new fingerings. Mr. Carter, look! A boy beamed, stretching his hand across 5 keys. That's reach, Leonard said, voice rough with pride. That's work. They learned a short piece Alyssa wrote for them. Front porch song, built on a gospel cadence easy to share. One child began. Another picked up the echo. Soon the room was layered with beginnings and answers, mistakes folding into music until there were no mistakes left. Again, Alyssa called, from the top. Find your note. Jerome's cane tapped the downbeat. Camille nodded the cue. The kids played, parents clapped, voices rose, call and response, laughter between measures. Phones came out, but not to mock, this time to remember. On the wall, the Hidden Harmonies banner fluttered in the AC breeze. Under it, a janitor's daughter led a roomful of children to claim a sound that had always belonged to them. The community hall exhaled at dusk, keyboards covered, folding chairs stacked, crumbs of cookies glittering on the tile. The Hidden Harmonies banner sagged a little, tired and proud. Laughter still clung to the walls like aftersound. Alyssa wiped the last keyboard with a soft cloth, small circles, careful. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and nickel. In the doorway, Leonard Carter stood with his cane, work jacket zipped to the chin, breath measured but steady. He watched his daughter move, swift, sure, a conductor tidying the echo of her own orchestra. You close up? He asked, voice low. Almost, Alyssa said. Kids did great today. Mr. Ellis says we're getting louder, in a good way. Leonard chuckled, then winced at the cough that followed. Loud can be holy. He limped to a chair and sat. Alyssa hurried over, kneeling to check the angle of his cane, the way she'd seen nurses do. He touched her hair, feather-light. Daddy, you okay? I am now. He nodded toward the room that had just held a dozen small miracles. I wanted to see this with my own eyes. They were quiet a moment, the hall humming its old fluorescent hum. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb and pulled away. Leonard cleared his throat, choosing words like notes. You didn't just play for food, he said at last, looking straight at her. You played for all of us who clean floors. Tonight you fed our souls. Alyssa's mouth trembled. I was so scared back then. I still get scared. Good, he said gently. Means your heart's still open. He lifted his hands, scarred, healed, forever working, and turned them palm up. These hands kept lights on and doors open. But your hands, he nodded toward her, fingers. They make people stop and listen. That's work too. Don't let anybody tell you different. She reached out and set her small hands in his, the old motif closing like a circle, calloused palms, pianist's fingers, labor and song laced together. Tears slipped without permission. I wanted to fix everything for you, she whispered. You did. He smiled, eyes shining. Not by sweeping my shift, by lifting my head. I walk into places now and folks say, "That's Alyssa's daddy. That's a better paycheck than I ever dreamed." Alyssa laughed through tears, then leaned forward and wrapped him tight. His jacket smelled like soap and winter air. He pressed his cheek to the crown of her head and closed his eyes. "Play again on Saturday," he murmured. "Play Front Porch for the little ones, and when you sit at that big piano downtown, don't forget the mop bucket in the music. That's where the shine comes from." She nodded against his chest. "For both of us." "For all of us," he corrected softly. The hall lights clicked off in halves, leaving the banner to flutter once in the dim, like a hand waving back. The night was wind-polished and clear when Alyssa turned the corner onto Maple and Ninth. The silver crown stood the way it always had, glass bright, brass handles, burnished by 1,000 hands that never noticed their own reflection. Through the window, the dining room lay quiet after close, chairs up, tables bare. The chandelier dozed, throwing sleepy constellations across the floor. In the far corner, the piano waited under a canvas cover, a small hill of silence, the same instrument that once hid beneath strangers' coats, the same keys that had remembered her when people didn't. Alyssa stepped closer. Her breath fogged the glass. She lifted her hand and pressed her palm to the window, fingers splayed, small, certain now. For a moment she could see everything at once in the pain. The child she had been, thin and shaking. The girl she was, steady and ready. The empty room that had once been a courtroom. "Thank you," she whispered. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to the piano, the night, or the part of herself that refused to break. Maybe to all of it. Maybe to the laughter that turned into listening. Maybe to a mop bucket rolling softly down a corridor. Behind her, a bus hissed at the curb, doors folding open and closed like a breathing thing. Far off, a church bell answered the hour. Alyssa tucked her hands into her coat sleeves and took one last look. The canvas didn't move. It didn't need to. Some instruments keep playing long after the lid is shut. She turned away, walking past the spot where Miss Ruth had first stood up for her, past the doorway where Tasha had watched with a fist on the glass, past a city that now knew her name. On a flyer taped to a light pole, the words "Hidden Harmonies" fluttered in the breeze, an arrow pointing forward. Alyssa smiled to herself and quickened her steps. There were kids waiting on Saturday. There was a father to kiss goodnight. There were keys to touch and hands to guide. The streetlights hummed, the frame widened, the city exhaled. Talent is a gift, but lifting others with it makes life truly meaningful. Some pianos sleep under covers. Some hands ache from work. But when we lift each other, even the quiet learns to sing. For Alyssa and Leonard, and for every child finding a key that fits, may the music keep opening doors. If this touched you, pass it on to someone who needs hope. Share the video and tell us in the comments who believed in you or who you're cheering for now. Subscribe for more Black stories told with care and check the description for ways to support community music programs like Hidden Harmonies. Thank you for listening.